A number of years ago, I was working with this church leadership team. And as we were seeking God's direction for them and identifying the challenges, there was a recurring theme, an issue that continued to rise up. And it became increasingly obvious that until we dealt with that, until we got to the root of it and eradicated it, it would continue to influence all they tried to do. It would bring limitation. See, the husband and wife pastoral team had a real insecurity about why they were there. They had not sought out that position. They hadn't trained for it. It had literally been thrust upon them. Effectively, the former pastor pretty much overnight decided he was done and walked away. And it became an issue of either they step up or the church would dissolve. And because of that, there was that lingering insecurity that were they really the right ones for this? Are they the ones that God really wanted in that position? And that insecurity brought limitation, and more importantly, it created an opening for the enemy, especially under pressure, in the big decisions, in the big challenges, when you're facing the Goliath. The enemy could come in and whisper and begin to erode their faith, erode their confidence, play on that insecurity. And what I had to do was literally walk them through the reality that how they got there wasn't the issue. Whether they had prepared for it, planned on it, dreamed for it, whether God has spoken it to them, or it had been thrust upon them, regardless, God had intentionally placed them there to be His instrument, His representatives, to bring life and goodness to those people. And it's that reminder for each one of us. Every assignment, every situation in your life is intentional placement. Now, some are obvious. It's those things, maybe marriage, whatever, that you work so hard to accomplish. Some just seem like maybe you're there just to make a living. Or for others, it's getting an education. Whatever the motivation might have been, whether they're temporary or profound, each one is God's intentional placement. And we've got to move in the confidence that God has intentionally placed you there to be that living demonstration of Him and His kingdom, walking in the confidence of His desire to move through you, regardless. Now, some again are profound. We think of Joseph. Well, it didn't start out that way. It was at one point obvious God had placed him there to deal with the crisis. I think of that beautiful story of Esther, that ultimately her entire life was leading up to being made queen for such a time as this. God had positioned her to literally be the instrument of saving His people. But some were much less obvious. Think of the stories. Laban was blessed for Jacob's sake. Potiphar was blessed for Joseph's sake. And so on. What we see is that it wasn't necessarily obvious to God's people, but it was obvious to those around them. But it's also the understanding as we grow in relationship with Him and the confidence in that anointing, that how often it brings an impact we may not initially recognize, but it changes atmospheres. It rubs off on people. In the Old Testament, when people were anointed, it wasn't like a little dab of oil. Literally, it was poured over them where it dripped. And what that meant was that anything they touched, anything they brushed against would be impacted by that oil. It would rub off. And it's the understanding as you, again, grow in relationship and grow in that confidence in the anointing, what God has put in you, whether you see it or recognize it yourself, that it is rubbing off, it's changing atmospheres around you. And probably profoundly and counterintuitively, you don't need to know how. You don't need to know specifically what it's doing. In fact, the more we focus on that, the more I think we bring limitation, rather than just moving in that bold, confident faith that you're there for a reason, that it's intentional placement, that God is working through you. And in some cases, it may be where it becomes obvious that you're there for a profound reason. And some, you may be there for a season and you may not realize for an extended period of time what God was doing through you in that place. You were just being faithful. Being faithful, whether it's in education, working, whatever the case may be, as you were faithful, but also faithful to be that demonstration of God's goodness, to allow His Spirit to move through you, His anointing to change the atmosphere, to touch the people around you, to make God real to a world that doesn't believe, and to bring that reality of His kingdom. From today, starting now, begin to move in that confidence, even especially those that maybe you struggle with. Why am I here? Those that you're uncertain about. Just like that couple, rather than allowing insecurity, rather than allowing that to be a weakness that the enemy can play on, that he can sow those seeds of doubt, move in the confidence. Each situation in your life, every assignment is God's intentional placement, and that God is at work through you, even when you don't recognize it.